Okay, so today is the 7th of Menachem Av. We're approaching Tisha B'Av. Rosh Mitten Yartzeit today. And we're dedicating the class to a former member of this class, Mrs. Sandra Blicker. If you don't know her, I don't know her full Jewish name.
I'm Shulamit Gittel, but I don't know her father's name.
So I went a few days ago to say Shema with her on Friday.
Wow. Was
she wasn't able to talk, but she, with her eyes, acknowledged me and actually said thank me. She said thank you before I left like a few times, said thank you. So she was definitely like present and responsive to our Shema. So this will be in honor of her Neshama, her funeral later today. Okay, so we're approaching Tisha B'Av. Of course, when we mark the destruction of both the first and second temple, there's a section of the Gemara. Gemara is in Tractate Gittin. Starts a bit earlier. We're looking at page 55b, but it starts a bit earlier, 52, somewhere around, and it goes through pages 60 something. And the Talmud there describes in great detail the events, or some of the events surrounding the destruction of the first and second temple. It's the kind of sections of the Gemara that we ought and should and do review when we come to this time of year. So I'm zooming in on two events, which we'll read together in English there. And as I read in the title page there, it's the story of the destruction and the beginning of Judaism as we know it today. So we know our sages tell us that on the day of Tisha B'Av, when the temple is destroyed, it's the same day that Mashiach is born. That is to say, that from the ashes of destruction itself, there emerges the process of redemption. As opposed to thinking of exile and redemption as two separate events, one wholly negative, and then the other one that comes to like respond, we should understand the redemption as that which is born forth from the way we live out in exile. This is an idea that's expressed in Chassidus in chapter 37 of Tanya, that the redemption is born out of exile. It's born out of our service of Hashem in exile. So it's a long process till we get to the Geula, till we get to redemption, but it's not an unrelated narrative. It's the end of this very same narrative. So in the moment of destruction itself, there's born the Redeemer. And likewise, we'll see here in the story that embedded in the story of the destruction, there is the birth of Judaism as we know it today. I shouldn't say the birth, but the framing of Judaism as we know it today, as I'll explain, on a very historical, basic level, which sets the narrative in motion to where we are today, which leads us to the redemption, may be God willing, very soon. So I'm going to read it in English, read along with me, and stop to explain as we're going along. So apropos the war that led to the destruction of the second temple, the Gemara examines several aspects of the destruction of that temple in greater detail. It says that temple because earlier it had spoken about the description of the first temple, and now it's discussing the second temple. So let's set the stage, actually, historically speaking. Rome occupies the land of Israel, as it does much of the known world at the time. The Jews do have kings, but depending on who the king is and what the infighting between the Jewish people are, but for the most part, these kings are basically vassal kings to Rome, which meant that they were just the puppets that Rome controlled, and that led to lots of corruption within the Jewish people, who would bribe the Romans officials best, and who would, work their way through the political halls of Rome to figure out who would be in charge. And in this way, the temple was controlled by a very corrupt group called the Tzedukim, who also had the Sadducees in English, also had a religious distinction from traditional Judaism as we know it. And there was another group which we'll meet soon, called the Biryonim, which are like the rebels. They were people who wanted to throw off the yoke of Yom and were willing to fight in the streets anytime, any day. And then you had the sages, which were called the Perushim, or the Pharisees in English. The word Perushim means that they separated themselves. In other words, they stepped away from political life and dedicated themselves to the preservance of Torah, as we'll learn soon in the story. So this is what's going on with the Jewish people. There's all kinds of infighting, as you can imagine.
What's going on now, no? God forbid, but like...
We might read this as a little cautionary tale, yes. We'll read forward as a story.
The one right now? I would say that Purushim are the Haredim. If it.
I'm not going to go
And it's Stukim maybe Chacham. I don't know.
in keeping with the thinking of the Perushim. I'm going to stay away from political commentary, as per the Pharisees who stayed away from political life. But we're going to see how this all happens. So this is the stage, and so you can imagine it's a very politically tense time. And for basically since Hanukkah, which is 200 and something years earlier, it's been on and off fighting in Israel. Sometimes Jews against Jews, sometimes Jews against Rome. Sometimes one set of Jews invites Rome to fight with them against another set of Jews. Not a very fun time. The Gemara describes elsewhere in great detail how two king brothers, sons of Shlomzion, Malka, the queen, who was a good queen, but her sons were fighting, and they fought in the streets of Jerusalem. One was entrenched in the Temple Mount, the other was encircling them. This is sometime before the destruction of the temple. So this is the scene of what life is like in Israel at the time. And while this is all happening, you have Jews who are laying the groundwork, as we'll learn soon, for what becomes the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Talmud, and for Judaism that we know today. So it's a very tumultuous time, to say the least. So, says the Gemara the following story. Says the following: Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written? The verse states, happy is the man who fears always, but he who has hardened his heart shall fall into mischief. Pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs. So explains Rabbi Yochanan, what's the meaning of this verse? Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. You may have heard the story before, but this is the source. The place known as the King Mountain was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen. We're not going to look at that today. The city of Beitar was destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot. We're going to leave that alone as well. So Rabbi Yochanan describes three. We're going to read that in a second. So that's the story we're going to get to. So but the Gemara introduces the story with Rabbi Yochanan stating these three major events as a result of like one smaller event. The temple being destroyed, or Jerusalem being destroyed on account of these two people, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the King's Mountain being destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen, and Beitar being destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot. The latter two stories we're not going to look at today. We're just looking at the first one, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and from there the Gemara gets onto other stories, and we'll look at one of those. So we're looking at two stories today. Sorry?
Spain. The expulsion of Jews from Spain.
Also was on Tisha B'Av. It's many, many years later, along with other disasters. World War I started then as well. Okay, so let's go. The Gemara explains. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. That's the first thing Rabbi Yochanan stated. So what is the story behind that? This is, Rabbi Getz mentioned the story on Shabbos last week.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the source of that story. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa, and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. So we'll call him Mr. A. He has a friend Kamsa and an enemy named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servants, go bring me my friend Kamsa. The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa. Mixed up invitation. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at his feast, his enemy. The host said to Bar Kamsa, that man is the enemy of that man. He's speaking poetically, saying, that is, you are my enemy. He's speaking in the third person, like that man is the enemy of that man. He doesn't even want to address him directly. Such a despised fashion. What then do you want here? Says the host, Mr. A, arise and leave. Get out. Kicks the man out of his house. Bar Kamsa said to him, so Bar Kamsa came assuming that maybe Mr. A wants to make peace with him. That's why he's being invited. So he comes with his hopes high. But Mr. A comes to the meal and sees his enemy there and says, sorry, get out. So Bar Kamsa said to him, look, since I've already come, let me stay and I will give you the money for whatever I eat or drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out. Just by the way, a word on the translation here. The bold is direct translation of Talmud, and the non-bold is Rabbi Steinsaltz's interpolated commentary to make it more lucid in our reading. So the host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said back to him, the host, I will give you the money for half of the feast, not just my own, but for half of everybody's feast. Just don't send me away. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa then said to him, I will give you the money for the entire feast. Just let me stay. I'll pay for everything. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. Imagine doing such a thing, holding someone by the hand and dragging them out of your house. After having been cast from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, and this is going to be a recurring theme, since the sages were sitting and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what they did, with what he did. This is going to be a theme throughout many of the stories here, that inaction is worse than bad action. It's going to be recurring a number of times. Some sages are going to remain silent and take inaction that's going to cause disaster. And here's the first one. Watching a man throw another man out of his house, they should have said something, but they didn't. And Bar Kamsa says, his host, he's not even upset at. He's upset at the silent sages who are watching this disaster. And they're accomplices. Yeah. So he said they were happy if they sat quietly. Now watch what's going to happen. He continues, I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He's going to make a plot to get Rome against the Jews. He went out and said to the emperor of Rome, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says that is the case? Like,
Was he?
Sorry?
Kamsa was not Jewish?
You're Jewish. Everybody here is Jewish. Bar Kamsa, Kamsa, the host, everyone's Jewish involved in the story, with the exception of the emperor.
The Moiser.
So Moiser.
Yeah, because of this frustration.
That's interesting. Rabbi Yochanan says that the temple was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, as if
That's right.
so they share blame
Yeah.
in some ways.
But
That's the way the story is introduced. I'm sorry.
I think that it was destroyed because of the sages.
Yes, so the sages are quiet, actually. That's an interesting point. And we're going to see more comments like that. That's right.
A situation like this.
Yes, so they're going to be more like that. Let's see. So the emperor said to him, who says that is the case? Like, why are you telling me baselessly that the Jews are rebelling? So Bar Kamsa said to him, go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government and see whether they will sacrifice it. And which is not a problem, by the way. We can sacrifice animals that come on behalf of non-Jews. That's okay. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf, which is like a choicest animal. Okay. So while Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made a blemish on its eyelid, a place where, according to us, i.e. halacha, it is a blemish. But according to them, Gentile rules for their offerings, it is not a blemish. So they offered in their temples, and a cut lip or a cut eyelid wouldn't make a difference. But for us, that becomes a blemish and it's invalid. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priest would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who did not consider it to be blemished. Imagine you going to like the dictator's army and saying, oh, well, we can't because there's a law that says we can't. What? The emperor is sending a sacrifice, take it. So they're stuck. So the blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. Okay, so we'll break a rule and we'll suffer for it a little bit, maybe, I don't know, but at least we'll save the Jewish people. You really want to invite the wrath of Rome? We'll break the rule one day to save literally the entire people.
But Kamsa made the thing intentionally?
Intentionally. He did it because he wanted to invoke Rome against the sages, against the Jews, because he was so mad at the sages sitting quietly while he was humiliated. He did it intentionally to set them up. Now, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas said to them, if the priests do that, meaning if they offer the offering, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. People are going to misread it. They're going to say, oh, you're allowed to have blemished offerings. The sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor, because he's going to go back to the emperor and say, hey, look, they didn't sacrifice. So the sages said, okay, they thought to kill him, so they would not go and speak against them. So option one was, let's just do the offering, we'll break the rule one time, and then everything will be fine. Zechariah says, no, but people are going to misunderstand. They're going to think you're allowed to offer blemished offerings. So the sages say back to Zechariah, okay, so let's just kill Bar Kamsa. He's going to go back to Rome and tell Rome that we're not offering his offering. Let's just take care of him right here and now. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is deserved to be killed. So as a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between Jews and the Romans began. Rabbi Yochanan says, The excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolos destroyed our temple, burned down sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. Second time where inaction leads to destruction. He should have taken action. Either tell the Jews, take it upon his shoulders to sacrifice an animal that has a blemish, or take it upon himself to make sure that this doesn't get reported to Rome. Instead, he said, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. What should you do? I don't know.
Crazy.
His inaction, second time, now that inaction causes a disaster. First, when the sages are listening quietly while Bar Kamsa is being humiliated, and now Rabbi Zechariah doing nothing while they're stuck with two options that are no good, but you got to choose one. You got to take some action, and he didn't. And he calls it the excessive humility. Like, I'm being too humble. I don't want to break any rules. You don't want to break any rules, and the whole house comes burning down. Okay, so now that we know how the war started, now let's see how the war started. There are three Roman legionnaires who lead the onslaught against Israel. It was a little in a lot of stages, and the history of that is not for now, but it started in the north, and then it came down to Jerusalem, and then they pulled back from Jerusalem, then went back into Jerusalem. There was a long process until they actually came to the destroying the temple itself. So the Gemara kind of skips through them and tells us the following. The Roman authorities then sent Nero Caesar against the Jews. You've heard of Nero. When he came to Jerusalem, he wished to test his fates. He shot an arrow to the east, and an arrow came and fell in Jerusalem. He then shot another arrow to the west, and it also fell in Jerusalem, meaning he wanted to see if God was allowing him to do what he's about to do. So he shot an arrow in different directions, and in both cases, it landed facing toward Jerusalem. He said, oh, this is a sign from heaven that I'm supposed to march on Jerusalem. He said to a child, Nero then conducted another test. He said to a child, tell me a verse that you learned today. This is something that comes up a number of times in the Gemara, where sages who, here it's the unique part here is that it's non-Jew doing it, but usually it's not uncommon that sages, starting with Mordechai HaTzadik, who did this. When Mordechai found out the decree against the Jewish people, he met the first three kids and asked them, tell me what you're learning. And the first child said, the next one said, and the other one, the third one said, Yad Ziknanihu. Those three psukim we see at the end come from that story. And each of those three psukim talk about how not to be afraid, God's with you. And that's what gave him the confidence to say the Jews would be saved in the story of Purim. So this idea of asking a child, tell me what you're learning, and hearing what they say as a kind of sign from Hashem is not uncommon in the Gemara. But here, what's unusual is that Nero, a non-Jew, is doing this. So Nero then conducted another test. He said to a child, tell me the verse you learned today. So he said to him, the child said to Nero, as follows, quote, a verse from Ezekiel, from Yecheskel, and I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people. Edom is a reference to Rome. So Hashem is saying, I'm going to lay my vengeance against Rome, as if to say Rome is going to be deserving of vengeance, because Rome is destroying Israel. And then later there's going to be vengeance. That's how he understands it. So Nero said, the Holy One, blessed be, he wishes to destroy his temple, and he wishes to wipe his hands with that man, meaning God wants Rome to attack the Jews, and then the Jews to go and wipe out Rome. So does Nero want to do this or not? So i.e. with me. So Steinzach explains, the Romans are associated with Edom, the descendants of Esau. If I continue on this mission, I will eventually be punished for having served as God's agents to bring about the destruction. So even though he finds that God actually wants the temple to be destroyed by the hands of Rome, but he also discovers that the ending is going to be his destruction. So he's like, I'm out. I'm not doing this. What's interesting here is Nero leaves, as we'll see in a second. What's interesting is that the first test he does, which is the arrows, points to Jerusalem, telling him to go attack. The second test he does is not from himself, but from a Jew. And what he hears there is God's response that whoever destroys Jerusalem is himself going to be destroyed. Right? So it's almost like the Jew, even before the temple is destroyed, already knows that he's going to come out on top. Right? This is the verse that the child says. And before the temple is even destroyed, the message he's being told is, even though there's going to be a destruction, you're going to come out on top at the end. And Nero discovers this not from his own test, but from hearing from a Jew. And that's why he says, I'm out. So the Gemara continues. So he fled and became a convert. Nero converted to Judaism. And ultimately, Rabbi Meir, one of the great sages of the Talmud, descended from Nero. Yep. Okay, so Nero's out. Rome's got to send someone else. The Roman authorities then send Vespasian Caesar against the Jews. Vespasian. Here comes a very interesting story. the story I referenced earlier about the beginning of Judaism as we know it today, coming from Vespasian. So Vespasian, he came and laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. Now, there were at the time in Jerusalem these 3 wealthy people. Number 1, Nagdima ben Gurion. Number 2, ben Kalba Savua. And 3, ben Tzitzit Hakeset. You don't have to remember the names, it's okay. The Gemara explains their names. Nagdima ben Gurion was called by the name because of the sun shine. The sun shined on his behalf. And that's the word Nakad from Nagdimon. As it is related elsewhere, that the sun once continued to shine in order to prevent him from suffering a substantial loss elsewhere. Ben Kalba Savua was called this because anyone who entered his house when he was hungry, as a dog, Kalev, would leave satiated, Savua. Ben Tzitzit HaKeset was referred to by that name because his ritual fringes, tzitzis, dragged along on blankets, Keset, meaning that he would not walk on the street with his feet on the ground, but rather they would place blankets beneath him. That's how wealthy he was. Okay, this is there are those who say that his seat, Kisei, was found amongst the nobles of Rome. That's why it was called Tzitzit HaKeset, meaning that he would sit among them. It's not uncommon in the Gemara that people aren't referred to by their actual names, but they're referred to by nicknames that are associated with something about their lives. Okay, that's like brackets. Back to the story. These 3 wealthy people offered their assistance. As we'll see in a minute. One of them said to the leaders of the city, I will offer their assistance during the siege, right? Because when there's a siege, the point of a siege is to starve out the people on the inside, to starve them out, right? So to lay siege to Jerusalem for 3 years, it's a long time to not have access to your fields and get food and grain, right? People start to. So these 3 wealthy people came forward to say, okay, let's see if we can support the city. So one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will feed the residents with wheat and barley. One of them said to the leaders of the city, I'll provide the residents with wine, salt, and oil. And one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will supply the residents with wood, basic staples of living. So the 3 of them are opening up their coffers and supporting the people, very generous. The Gemara comments that the sages gave special praise to he who gave the wood, since this was an especially expensive gift. Okay. As Rav Hizda would give all the keys to his servant, except to the key to his shed for stowing wood, which he deemed the most important of all of them. The Gemara is just citing to this to make the point that wood is very precious. So much so that Rav Hizda, who lived many years later, wouldn't give away his key to his woodshed to any of his servants. Rav Hizda said, 1 storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood for cooking and baking fuel. In other words, the wood is almost more important than the grain, because the grain you have plenty of and it's easy to store a lot. Wood is much harder to store a lot, and you use it much quicker. Right? For whatever reason, yeah. It's more expensive, not more important, but more expensive. Okay, right? It's just because of the quantity wise. In other words, if you have a storehouse of grain, it lasts. How much does it get you? And for every storehouse of grain, you need, let's say, quadruple the amount of storehouses of wood to actually be able to use it, right? So, exactly. So it's more expensive. Okay, back to the story. These 3 wealthy men had between them enough commodities to sustain the besieged city for 21 years. They're only sieged for 3 years, but they could have lasted for much longer, which meant they could have outlasted the people sieging them, because the people outside also got to eat. They don't want to sit there for 21 years away from their home and family in Rome. How long do you expect to go on an expedition and siege a city? So they had enough to survive, to outlive the Romans. But there were certain zealots amongst the people of Jerusalem. I mentioned before the group of zealots. These are people who at all costs wanted to throw off the yoke of Rome. So the sages said to the zealots, let us go and make peace with Romans. Like the zealots were zealots, that's what they were. So if you tried to run out, and they would not hesitate to kill their own to prevent someone from bargaining a deal with the Romans. So much so they wanted to maintain their independence at all costs. So the zealots said to the sages, but the zealots did not allow them to do this. The zealots said to the sages, let us go and engage in battle against the Romans. But the sages said to them, you'll not be successful. So they're at a deadlock. These group want to fight. These group want to say, let's just make peace. It would be better for you to wait until the siege is broken in order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle. It would be better for you to wait until the siege is broken. So we have enough for 21 years. You want to fight the Romans? Wait till they're weakened. Wait 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and then we'll go out and fight them if you really want to fight. Right now, it's a bad idea. But they're zealots, so they don't listen to that kind of thing. So in order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle, the zealots arose and burned down these storehouses of wheat and barley. And there was a general famine. It's Jew against Jew. This is again Jew against Jew. Not the Romans laid siege, but they had enough to survive. Here comes these overzealot people and burns all the food, now forcing the people very quickly to go hungry, and your options are fight or die of starvation. So, and there was a general famine. So with regard to this famine, just to get to how bad it is related that, quote, Marta bar Baitos was one of the wealthy women of Jerusalem. She sent out her agent and said to him, go bring me fine flour. By the time he went, the fine flour was already sold. He came and said to her, there's no fine flour, but there is ordinary flour. She said to him, go then and bring me the ordinary flour. By the time he went, the ordinary flour is also sold. He came and said to her, there's no ordinary flour, but there is coarse flour. She said to him, go and then and bring me some of the coarse flour. By the time he went, the coarse flour was already sold. He came and said to her, there's no more coarse flour, but there is barley flour. Barley is usually for animals, not for humans. She said to him, okay, I'm starving. Go then and bring me the barley flour. But once again, by the time he went, the barley flour was also sold. She had just removed her shoes, but she said, I will go out. She took off her shoes to like relax at home, but she said, I will go out and see if I can find something to eat, which itself is already degrading for a woman of this stature. A woman, a wealthy woman in Jerusalem with servants doing her shopping. Now she's going to go out without her shoes on. So she went out and she stepped on some dung, which stuck to her foot. And overcome by disgust, this wealthy woman, she died. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai read concerning her a verse found in the section of the Torah listing the curses that will befall Israel. Right? We have the blessings and the curses. So Rabbi Yochanan said, the verse reads, the tender and delicate woman amongst you will not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground. So here the verse is being fulfilled in this woman. She didn't even put her feet on the ground. She put it into dung and died. There are those who say that she did not step on dung, but rather she ate a fig of Rab Tzadok and became disgusted and died. What's this fig? So what are these figs? So Rabbi Tzadok, so the Gemara explains. Rabbi Tzadok observed, all the stories are going to link back up. We're going little tangents. Right? The point of the story here is that the famine started because these zealots burnt it all down. We're trying to describe how bad the famine is, that there's this woman who couldn't get anything to eat, and she stepped outside and died, either as a result of stepping on dung or because she ate this fig. Now the Gemara is going to explain what this fig is by way of telling us a story of Rabbi Tzadok, and that's going to link back to the story of Vespasian. Rabbi Tzadok observed fasts for 40 days, praying that Jerusalem will not be destroyed.
40 days?
40 days. Oh, I'm sorry, for 40 years, my apologies. Observed fast for 40 years, praying that Jerusalem will not be destroyed. Right? This gives you a sense of how long people knew this was coming. I mentioned before, this was on and off for a very long time. He became so emaciated that from fasting, that when he would eat something, it would be visible from the outside of his body. This sounds like someone who survived the camps. So skinny that you could see the food going in his body. If you've seen images of the liberation camps, it looks something like that. I'm sorry, the camps being liberated, it looks something like that. And when he would eat after a fast, they would bring in figs, and he would suck out their liquid and cast the rest away. So, in other words, if you eat too much, it's also not healthy, right? Because you're so, right? This happened in the camps also. People who ate too much when they haven't eaten so long, and they died because their stomachs couldn't process it. So he wouldn't eat a full meal. That would be too dangerous for him because of how skinny he became. So he would just suck the nutrients out of a fig to live. Okay. It was one such fig that Martha bar Baitos found, and that caused her death because of how I guess putrid the fig was. So two versions to how Martha died, either because she stepped on dung or because she ate one of these figs. So the Gemara continues. It was further related that as she was dying, she took out all the gold and silver and threw it in the marketplace, where she's on the street. No one can come help her. You just imagine the scene. This rich woman who was once on top of the world, top of Jerusalem. Now she's lying on the street dying, alone, or maybe even public. I don't know, or soon in public. She's in the market. So she took out all the silver and gold she has and she threw it in the marketplace. She said, "Why do I need this? Like, what do I need this money for? It's like silly. I'm dying here, hungry." And this is what is written: they shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be an impure thing. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels. Quote from Ezekiel. Right? So she's hungry, she's wealthy her whole life, but what's it doing for her? Okay, we're going to link back to Tzadok soon. Back to the deadlock between the zealots and the sages. The sages want to make peace, the zealots want to fight. And as a result, the zealots burnt the grain, the storehouses, to force everybody out in battle. So the Gemara relates the following. Abba Sikra was the leader of the zealots of Jerusalem, the Beryoni. He was also the son of the sister of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the leading Jewish halachic authority of the day, famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We're going to see in a moment why he's so famous and why he's so important in our history. And it's going to be him, together with Vespasian, that create Judaism as we know it today. We'll see that shortly. That's Rabbi Yochanan. That's Rabbi Yochanan who actually speaking earlier, the one who introduced the whole story. That's Rabbi Yochanan, and he lives almost a century later. This is a famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So his sister's son is leading the zealots. It's his nephew. So you can see how all this tension is pulling families apart. You have an uncle and a nephew. Uncle, leader of the Pharisees who are staying out of political life, the sages who want to make peace, and a nephew who's leading a group of people who just destroyed food to starve out the people that his uncle is leading. Craziness. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent a message to him, "Come to me in secret." This is often the case where you have like bureaucrats from different countries that can't get along, but people at top secretly make a deal. This happened with famously with JFK and Gorbachev. They set up the secret line so that their underlings don't interfere and ruin the peace that they actually want to bring.
No media.
No media, no bureaucrats ruining anything. Two people at the top who see the bigger picture and let's settle it. And this is what's happening here. The leader of the Beryonim and the leader of the sages, leader of the zealots and the leader of the sages, uncle and nephew. So uncle says to nephew, "Come, let's meet in secret." So he came, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? Like, what are you guys thinking?" Abba Sikra said to him, "What can I do? For if I say something to them, they will kill me." Right? This is, again, this position of leadership where like a leader doesn't necessarily always call the shots. Can't. You lead against the way people want you to be led, and you're out. Sorry? This gives you an insight into political life. This is a lot of interesting. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Okay, so you don't like this extremity that your people are doing. I get it. Let's try to work something out. You guys are the crazy ones with swords and things and control the streets. Therefore," he says, "show me a method that I'll be able to leave the city. Sneak me out. And it's possible that through this, there will be some salvation. So if you can sneak me out, I'll go talk to Rome and negotiate. No one's going to know. Not your people, not my people. No one's going to know that I'm leaving. Only me and you sneak me out of the city because you control the entrance and exits. It's not even the Romans who control the exits and entrances. It's the zealots who control the exits and entrances, right? Because they want to prevent anybody from creating peace with the Romans." And he asked his nephew, "Sneak me out of the city." So Abba Sikra said to him, "This is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare so that it'll be widespread that you are in ailing condition. So start spreading a rumor that you're dying, basically. You can't die suddenly, but it's not crazy that someone's dying in the streets of Jerusalem. Everybody's starving, right? Right, but you want to build the story. So it's a ploy, you'll see. He's pretending to be sick, and it's not uncommon. There's famine. Imagine a sickness going around also. There's a siege, there's people dying. This is not... Okay, so everybody's going to come and talk about, the great leader of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is dying. Afterwards, bring something putrid, something that smells, and place it near you so that people will say that you died and you started to decompose, which is, again, not uncommon. Where are you burying people in Jerusalem under siege? People die and get left.
in the streets.
in the streets. This happened 70 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
right? So put something near you that will make it smell like you're decomposing. And then have your students enter and bring you to burial. And let no one else come in so the zealots not notice that you are still light, meaning you're still alive. So now his closest students know that he's faking his death. As the zealots know that a living person is, not light as in light in your eyes, but light as in like you're not so heavy, right? As zealots know that a living person is lighter than a dead person. So have trusted students carry you so that no one else knows that you're actually really alive. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did this. So this is he's setting up a whole, it's crazy. What?
They started out very late.
He's faking his death. Rabbi Lezer entered from one side, Rabbi Yeshua from the other side, two of his trusted students, to take him out. When they arrived at the entrance to the city, on the inside, the guards who were from the faction of the zealots wanted to pierce him with their sword in order to ascertain that he was actually dead, as was the common practice. They were not silly, these zealots. They knew what was going on. And they said, okay, you want to go out because this guy's smelling and dying in the streets? No problem. We're going to stab him first. Abba Sikra, the nephew who's in charge of he's about to watch his people murder his uncle, who they think is already dead. He's got to stop it. So Abba Sikra said to them, the Romans, if you do this, the Romans will say that they pierce even their teacher. It's going to make us look weak. The guards then wanted to at least push him to see whether he's still alive, in which case he would cry out on account of the pushing. Abba Sikra said to them, the Romans, will say that they push even their teacher. Meaning we have to hold face for the Romans. We have to look strong. We have to look confident. And if you start doing this, it makes us look weak. The guards then opened the gate and he was taken out. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, i.e. the Roman camp, he said, he went to Vespasian. He's the leader of the Romans. Greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king. Referring to him as king, as emperor. Vespasian said to him, you are liable for two death penalties. One, because I'm not king yet, and you call and I'm not king, and yet you call me king. That's called treason. Call someone else king. I'm not king. I'm a legionnaire here. What do they call it? A centurion? What do they call it? Maybe proctors. I don't remember what it's called. There's a word for it when you're like a. Sorry. No. Where like Rome had a person representing them in another country.
Legionnaire?
No, legionnaire is like a warrior. Anyway, something, there was a word for it.
Centurion?
I don't remember what it was. There's a specific word for it. I don't remember. Anyway, so he says, you can't call me king. That's treason. There's a king in Rome. There's an emperor in Rome. And furthermore, if I'm king, why didn't you come until now? By the way, this refrain, if you are king, why didn't you come until now, is a thought that many Jews have as they say Hamelech on Rosh Hashanah. You refer to God as the king who sits on the throne. If I'm king, where were you till now? Like Hashem speaking. But anyway, Vespasian says to him, look, you can't call me king because I'm not king yet. And if I am king, where were you until now? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, as for what you said about yourself, that I am not king, in truth, you are king. If not now, then in the future. As if you are not king, Jerusalem will not be handed over to your hand. As it is written, and then Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one. And the mighty one means only a king, as is written, and their mighty shall be of themselves, and their ruler shall proceed from the midst of them, indicating that mighty one parallels ruler. The Lebanon means only the temple. As it is stated, the good mountain and the Lebanon, referring to Jerusalem. In other words, he's pointing to two verses which indicate that only a king can control the temple. So if you're taking control of the temple, you must be king. And if you're not king yet, you will become king in short order before you take over the temple. And as for what you said with the second comment, that if I'm not king, why didn't you come until now? He said, well, I would have loved to, but there are zealots amongst us and do not allow us to go to do this. Okay. So understanding that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple, Vespasian said to him, look, if there's a barrel of honey and a snake is wrapped around it, wouldn't they break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In a similar fashion, I am forced to destroy the city of Jerusalem in order to kill the zealots barricaded within it. In other words, the Romans in Rome don't care if the temple stands or doesn't stand. They don't care. They just don't want to have rebels. The Romans were a little bit like the mafia. They don't care what you believe, as long as the envelope is thick enough. They don't care. So the Romans didn't care what people believed. The Greeks did. The Greeks were fighting to have Jerusalem become Hellenized. But the Romans couldn't care less. Believe whatever you want, as long as you pay your, they call it tribute. So, but the Zealots who are rebelling are obviously not letting the tribute go through. So Vespasian says, I don't care if your temple stands, but it's being held by these snake. So I have no choice but to destroy the temple, because I got to get rid of the rebels. Gemara comments, now this is the third time where someone is silent and it leads to disaster. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent and did not answer. In light of this, Rabbi Yosef later read the verse about him and some say it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Quote, I am the Lord who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish. In other words, he's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is such a wise person, all of a sudden he's foolish, he can't speak. Because as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai should have said the following to Vespasian in response. In such a case, we take tongs, remove the snake, and kill it, and this way leave the barrel intact. So too, you should kill the rebels and leave the city as it is. So third time again, where the sages should have said something and didn't. Vespasian says, I got to break the barrel, I got to destroy the temple to get rid of the rebels. And Rabbi Yochanan could have said, no, be a little crafty, go around, take your rebels, house to house combat, get rid of all the rebels and leave the temple intact. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent. The third time, right before we had Zechariah silent when they brought the blemished offering, and before that we had the sages silent when Bar Kamsa was insulted. The third time that silence and inaction causes destruction. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a Latin term for that also.
Which means?
Silence is equal to agreement. If you're silent when someone says something, it's like you agree. It's halachic terminology. There's a term for it in Latin also. Agree by silence. Acquiescence by silence, or something like that. But there's a term for it. Anyway, so in the meantime, as they were talking, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Vespasian, a messenger arrived from Rome and said to him, rise, for the emperor has died. And the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you, Vespasian, as their leader and make you the next emperor. So Vespasian is impressed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai just said 2 minutes ago that he's going to become king in short order. And here a messenger arrives from Rome that he's going to be appointed king. Of course, he's very impressed. At that time, Vespasian was wearing only one shoe. And he tried to put on the other one. It would not go on his foot. He then tried to remove the other shoe that it was already wearing, but it too would not come off. He said, what is this? Like, why isn't my shoe coming off or going on? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, be not distressed or troubled, for good tidings, when you get good piece of information, have reached you. As it is written, good tidings make the bone fat. Get bigger. And your feet have grown fatter out of joy and satisfaction for being appointed king. Vespasian said to him, but what is the remedy? What must I do in order to put my shoe on? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, have someone with whom you are displeased come and pass before you. So good news makes you get bigger, and bad news makes you get smaller. So have someone you don't like come here. As it is written, a broken spirit dries the bones. He did this, and his shoe went on his foot. Vespasian said to him, since you are so wise, and you didn't come, why didn't you come to me until now? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, but didn't I already tell you that I couldn't come because the zealots are stopping? Vespasian said to him, I also told you what I had to say, meaning you're wasting your time here because I can't stop the destruction of the temple. Vespasian then said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, I will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and waging war against it. In other words, Rome still has its mission. So I'm going to go back to be king, but someone else is coming. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you. And here comes the crucial. Now you know the backstory. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says these crucial requests, which saved Judaism till this day, and I'll explain. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, give me Yavne and its sages, and do not destroy it. Yavne is the school, the yeshiva, the study house where the sages were, somewhere north of Jerusalem. And it's there that the sages reclused themselves, seeing destruction coming, and dedicated their time to preserving, codifying Jewish law that will eventually become the Mishnah. It's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students who write the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, 2 generations later. And
was there 5?
the Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai had 5 students, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is after, right? Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tashfin, Rabbi Elazar, mentioned in the Pirkei Avos, right? The 5 students there. So we have to remember that in the times of the temple, Judaism was centered on the temple. That was Judaism. Judaism was centered on the temple and the land, bringing your tithes, bringing your sacrifices, making pilgrimage, and so on.
And there was not
So it's
much
very
writing.
not so much writings. You in the temple, you had what's called the Sanhedrin, the High Court, and it was their job to preserve Torah from generation to generation to generation, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. But now that the temple is being destroyed, they see an exile is coming. So we have to make Judaism transportable. We have to make Judaism not be stuck on a national temple, ritualistic based religion, because it's going to be over. We have to make it transportable. And they took Judaism and they put it into ideas and thoughts of Torah that anybody and everybody can have access to. And that is the seed and the kernel that grows into the redemption. Because the redemption is when all Jews and all people have that relationship with Hashem, not just going to the temple to serve Hashem, and the temple, being, even in its good days, being run by the righteous Kohanim. In the later years, it was by corrupt Kohanim. But even assuming it's by righteous Kohanim and righteous sages, but they're the standard bearers of Torah, and we just go there to join the ritual. But in a post-temple Judaism, as it is today, every Jew's got to find his own relationship with Hashem. And that comes through the Torah that's preserved by this yeshiva that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai negotiates with Vespasian to keep. So seeing the destruction coming, he plants the seed for Judaism to survive and what eventually becomes the redemption that the learning that we're experiencing today is all thanks to this event.
Just have a thought that it's like a Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, because
that is exactly right.
Because of the Yerida, so then it was
that's correct.
Written on everything that can reach all the Jews, then to be able to have the third.
That's correct. That's correct. So that's correct. This has planted the seed for what Judaism is today, which eventually leads to the Mashiach coming. This idea that every Jew can develop his own personal relationship with Hashem starts here when Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai saves the yeshiva, which turns into the Mishnah, which turns into the Talmud, which turns into the Torah we learn to this very day, which till then was preserved by the scholars in the Sanhedrin and the temple, and a Jew observed by going to the temple, but didn't necessarily have the kind of knowledge that we have today. Certainly not a text of a siddur, certainly not a chumash. Maybe they have a chumash. Presumably they have a chumash, right? Because everybody has to have a chumash. But everything else is Baal Peh. And unless you were that is to say verbally and orally and by heart, and unless you were a scholar of stature that was able to memorize and learn like this, for the most people, it was a closed non-book, right? It wasn't a book. But with this, Torah became transportable and transcends barriers, transcends the geography of Israel. And that way, the idea of Israel can be everywhere in the world, which is what Mashiach is all about, the idea of Israel everywhere. So let's conclude the story with that.
So that's what he did at a
That's correct.
That's
correct. So that's correct. All these sages throughout history were all pushing the needle in this narrative of making more and more of Torah and God available to everybody. So with the Arizal beginning to bring Kabbalah, and then with the Baal Shem Tov bringing Chassidus to the masses, and with the Mishnah, with the Gemara, with the Rambam making halacha available to everybody, with the Shulchan Aruch making it more available. That's what these sages did to bring the Jewish people slowly closer to a redemptive state where Torah becomes more and more available for everybody. And it starts with this story of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. So let's conclude the story. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said to him, I want 3 things from you. Number 1, give me Yavne and its sages and do not destroy it. Number 2, spare the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel and do not kill them as if they were rebels. Rabbi Gamliel, I don't want to go down the story, but essentially Rabbi Gamliel is on a line of people who were like Jewish leaders for one generation after another, going back to King David, going back to Hillel the Elder, and then back to King David before that, and going downward all the way into the post-Talmudic era. There was father, son of people who were the leaders of the Jewish people, even in Babylonia. And Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was not on that line. And he really assumed that position temporarily. And here he's negotiating to give the leadership position that he has back to its rightful owners. That humility, not to keep it for himself, but actually to give it back to its rightful owners, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, and he keeps on going further down the line. So he negotiates to keep that family line alive, and the leadership that he holds to give it back to that line, which is a beautiful thing in itself, this humility.
David's dynasty?
it's not literally David's dynasty because they weren't kings, but they were called Nasi. They were called the Nasi. And then when they were in Babylonia, they were called the Reish Galusa, the head of the exile or the exilarch. But they did come from the Davidic line. Yeah. So that's the second thing he asks for. He asks for Yavna, the sages. He asks number 2 for the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel to remain alive. And number 3, he asks, and lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok, that person who fasted for 40 years and was so emaciated, he asked for a doctor to heal him. And we'll conclude with this. Rabbi Yosef read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rekiva who applied the verse to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Quote, I am the Lord who turns wise men backwards and makes their knowledge foolish. Again, that verse describing someone who's usually wise to be tongue-tied. Before, it was in regard to the fact that he didn't tell him use tongs to remove the snake and then take the barrel out. You don't have to break the barrel to get rid of the snake. You don't have to destroy the temple to get rid of the rebels. But now they're saying it in regard to something else, because he should have said to him, leave the Jews alone this time. Instead of negotiating for these three things, he should have negotiated to preserve the temple. So the Gemara asks, so why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai make this request? So he maintained that Vespasian might not do that much for him, and there would not even be a small amount of salvation. Therefore, he only made a modest request in the hope that he would receive at least that much. In other words, if you over ask, you get nothing. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, if I tell him, okay, you know what, back off, Vespasian's going to say, sorry, but I can't do that. And then he lost it. So he figured he has to settle, so to speak, for preserving the yeshiva of Yavna, which really was this genius that preserved Judaism for what we have today. So we'll stop over here, but I printed more of the story because the Gemara goes on to describe. You can take it, keep it, read it more.
Oh, yeah.
A fascinating story. The Gemara describes how Vespasian had to go back to Rome because he's becoming emperor, and they sent Titus. First, actually, the Gemara describes the healing for Rabbi Tzadok, a certain kind of drink that they gave him. Right? They first gave him a drink of bread, how they slowly brought him back to life, slowly renourished him. Then the Gemara goes on to describe Vespasian go back to Rome, and then Titus coming to destroy the temple, and then eventually how Titus died. The Gemara goes through that whole story. Very, very fascinating. But I just want to share, these are the main points of the story is the destruction that came from hatred and inaction, and then the kernel and the seed of redemption that's born out of the very ashes of destruction, and someone having the foresight to understand that notwithstanding the physical destruction, if we maintain our spiritual identity, we'll outlive everybody. That's essentially what he argues for. In keeping the yeshiva, he's saying maybe our physical destruction is about to happen, and maybe our land is not going to be here, but our spiritual identity is staying here forever, and that transcends any borders. And that's why he negotiates for the saving of the yeshiva, and we're thankful that today we have Judaism thanks to this event. A wonderful day. May these days be transformed into days of gladness and joy, and may Tisha B'Av indeed be a day of celebration.
C'est une activité, on touche la